and use the chat feature and tell us where you're watching from and say hello. And I want to kick this over now to my good friend and somebody we've just grown to love so much here at SGR, and that is Micah Gaudet, the Deputy City Manager from Maricopa, Arizona, and really, I think one of the leading experts in AI in local government across the country. And Micah, thank you for joining us today. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and you had a great idea on how we're going to do introductions. So let's just get at it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Excited to join with Nicole and Dr. Kincaid. Quick backstory. They invited me out, I think, earlier this year in January to come out to Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, the Meyner Center, and do a symposium on the AI for local government. And I got to see a small glimpse, albeit, but got to see firsthand some of the incredible work that they're doing out there. And across across the city management and the city local government landscape, they're just incredible people doing incredible work. And what the Meyner Center and what Lafayette College is doing is right up there with the best of them. So with that being said, I'd like to start off with Dr. Kincaid, if you don't mind introducing our guest, Nicole Beckett, and then Nicole, I'll have you introduce Dr. John Kincaid as well too. So Dr. Kincaid.
Well, thank you, Micah. Well, yeah, I'm very happy to introduce Nicole Beckett. She's been with the Meyner Center for, I think, 4 years now. I didn't prepare for doing this introduction, Micah, so
That
but
means we get the real stuff, the real deal, right?
as director of the center, I can say that I'm 150% happy to have brought her on board. She's been a tremendous asset to the Meyner Center. She has a long career in local government. Most recently, before coming to the Meyner Center as city manager in Lehighton, which is also in Pennsylvania, a public electric municipality, has its own electrical, provides electrical service to people in the community. And we have a number of those in Pennsylvania. So there are others in other parts of the country. So she also brings a unique perspective from that point of view. And so Nicole engages in a lot of work with local governments in our roughly 10 county region, I would say, executive recruitment, organizational analysis, visioning, strategic planning, a variety of other activities. And then in addition to that, Nicole is the lead person for student involvement. So she organizes internships for students and local governments in our area and has been very successful in developing that program and other student activities that take students to the state capitol in Harrisburg. And so she's a very active and valuable member of the Robert B. and Helen S. Meyner Center for the Study of State and Local Government.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so Professor Kincaid, he has been at the center since 1994. He is actually the one and only director of the Meyner Center. And prior to that, he has a very rich career in history as far as being renowned in the study of federalism. He is the editor of Publius, the Journal of Federalism, since 1981 and then that went through 2006, I believe. He is also he's done a lot in his career, so you just have to look him up really to see all the things he has done. He served with the United States Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, has been at a variety of different universities, and has been at the Meyner Center, which is, again, he had founded in 1994. It's an endowed center from the Meyners of New Jersey, and he stands behind our mission. He's created our mission, which is to educate students on the importance of state and local government and encourage their participation, and also to help local government be more effective and efficient. As he mentioned, my career was in local government, so coming from that world of having elected officials as my bosses throughout my entire career, to come to Lafayette College and have Professor Kincaid as the director of the center and also as the leader of the center, it's an honor every day, and I couldn't ask for a better boss. to have somebody support our cause and our mission and to be able to help get us out there and make local government better. So Professor Kincaid is exceptional in what he has to say and do. And again, I encourage you to look up all of his background, because if I start talking about it, I'll just keep going on.
Well,
Thanks, Nick.
if I could just add about the Meyner Center, that's Meyner, okay, not Minor. Robert Meyner was the former governor of New Jersey. He graduated from Lafayette College in 1931, and his wife, Helen Meyner, served in Congress for 2 terms in the House of Representatives during the Carter years. So they endowed this center as a way of trying to encourage students to take state and local government seriously, and that's what we try to do. And I also teach a course on state and local government.
Thank you. Yeah, the Meyner Center is incredible. Look that up, and it's a incredible work that they're doing, and grateful for those contributions from the past governor and congressman there as well too. To kick things off, one of the things we were briefly talking about in the proverbial green room was how different local governments are across the U.S. I think Mike had mentioned, the differences in Massachusetts, and then Nicole, you were commenting about how varied and vast the different local government entities are in Pennsylvania itself too. The 2,500 plus local government entities or something close to that. So, kind of kick things off, given that reality, and then specifically thinking about AI, it does look like there are vastly different speeds at which local governments are adopting AI. States are responding very unevenly, and thus far, the federal government has been largely hands off. I'm curious. I'll start with you, Dr. John, and then go to Nicole as well. How does that uncoordinated landscape create obstacles for local governments? And what are some things that local governments should do to protect themselves in that type of environment?
Well, the current landscape doesn't necessarily present obstacles to local governments, where they're more likely to find obstacles as states increasingly legislate in this area, and as that legislation affects local governments. And this has meant, I think, at the moment, local governments pretty much dealing with these things on their own and trying to find their own way in the AI world, whether that's the adoption of AI tools for local government, or dealing with data centers that might want to come into their local government area where they have to deal with those things. And so in that sense, it's kind of an open frontier. But what we are seeing is that states have significantly increased their legislation regarding AI. There are hundreds of bills before state legislatures dealing with AI, and we're going to see more of those coming down the pike. In addition to that, we have New York State has put a moratorium on data centers, for example, and 14 other states are considering moratoriums as well. So we're seeing a lot of activity of this in state legislatures. So I think one piece of advice for local governments is pay attention to what your state legislature is doing, and think about lobbying or having a voice in the legislation that's being considered. And as we move along in the webinar, we can discuss some of the legislation that states are considering in the AI area.
Yeah. Nicole, what given your decades of experience in local government, what advice would you have for local governments to navigate this landscape, and also to protect for local governments to protect themselves?
So I think when in thinking about, I'm thinking about policy in two ways. So there's the external policy as it applies to that of your zoning and land use laws and those policies that come into place, and making sure that you're educated and informed on what is out there, what resources are available. And then there's also the internal policy as to the use of it and the use of it within the municipality. So it's a matter of, really understanding how and why and what you're using it for, but also making sure that the that the over reliance on it is not taking away that human component of public service. So when I'm thinking about it, it's the policies internal and external, and then everything that goes behind that when it comes to ethics and when it comes to transparency and trust and making sure that you are staying as that resource of trust and continuing, to make sure to serve in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, you both kind of mentioned something in terms of the internal policy making, the value of I had the benefit of having conversations with you both prior to this conversation, and immediately as you were talking, I'm thinking of those examples that you talked in our pre-session on, the data center policies and things like that cities were creating, and the shared resources that can become. So I'm curious, Nicole, can you speak a little bit about what you're seeing in Pennsylvania specifically when it comes to policies for data centers and how that's being shared and iterated across different localities? I'd love to start with you first on that one. I know you shared that before, so I think it really ties well into what we just discussed in terms of how to protect our local governments.
Sure. Well, and I would start by saying I know Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro has been a leader in moving forward with getting the framework set for the Commonwealth as far as that stance. So knowing that there's a fast track program for permitting, knowing that there's the standards that come with that, and knowing that preparations needed, there are resources available to the municipalities, and they have to know where to look for those. So that's always important. With the Department of Community and Economic Development and the governor's office, you can find some quick references on that. But it comes into, and the question exactly again, Micah, was like talking about the policies that we need to
Yeah,
be
on the
thinking
data.
about.
Yeah, on the data centers, I think you spoke to some examples of policies that were created about data centers that were being shared across the local governments in Pennsylvania. That was rather fascinating.
Sure. I know there's some counties that have put out some documentation on it, like as far as just overall having the guide. So an ordinance guide. I know Chester County has an ordinance guide, which is I think the most substantive framework in the Commonwealth that I know of. The DCED also has a data center planning toolkit. So there's those two resources. In addition to that, it's really a matter of understanding the zoning and land use law. So, being able to make sure that the ordinances that are out there, a lot of curative amendments are coming up. So being able to speak and educate the public on what that means, any kind of zoning ordinance takes time to amend. So when the public's hearing about obviously anything related to the curative amendment and or data centers, they may assume it's because one's coming in, whereas that's not necessarily the case. It's more
Mhm.
of getting prepared for them
Yeah.
and making
Yeah.
those decisions at that policy level, and being able to know what the elected officials have to decide on.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, as Nicole was mentioning, we have a number of model ordinances now, at least in Pennsylvania. She mentioned the Chester and Montgomery County Planning Commissions has been widely used. York County Planning Commission has also come out with a model ordinances, and both of these counties, these ordinances date from April of this year. We also have a statewide group called Penn Future, which has also put out a model ordinance, so they can be used by local governments. I think we also have some state legislatures now that are going to be legislating model ordinances for local governments. I don't think any state has passed one yet, but a number of states are thinking about that. So, kind of generalizing here, these model ordinances are focusing particularly on three issues. One is noise limits from these, particularly since data centers will use fans to help cool the system. They make a lot of noise. Water and electricity energy impacts is also being, these ordinances are dealing with those issues, the use of water and tremendous amount of electricity And then a third area are kind of buffers and setbacks. All right, is something else these ordinances do. So if we look into more details, um, these ordinances, many of them now require annual reports on energy and water use from the data center, pre-application requirements, including meetings, and projected water and energy use. And this is where state legislation is going also on data centers.
Mhm.
They're setting up kind of rules for data centers statewide. So most of these, either model ordinances or state laws, also seek to protect residential properties from property value loss, fast-tracked permitting in some states, which we have. Nicole mentioned that is the case in Pennsylvania. Some states are requiring data centers to use a certain amount of renewable energy for their energy sources. Most states are prohibiting tax credits for data centers, and some are requiring prevailing wages for the workers who are constructing the data centers. So we are seeing states getting into this area as well. So it might be worth mentioning New Jersey. New Jersey's new plan, just initiated by the governor, requires data centers to use clean energy. They have to contribute to any grade infrastructure that's needed to support the data center, and they have to prevent costs from being passed on to existing ratepayers. New Jersey uh, plan also requires data centers to report on their energy and water use. And New Jersey is also going to require community benefit agreements. Uh, and the state will provide resources to help municipalities negotiate, have more leverage when they negotiate these community benefit agreements. So to deal with impacts like noise, light, pollution, other things, and then New Jersey is going to require the facilities to use local trades and prevailing wages on construction and operations. So
Wow.
I think we're going to see more of this as we come along, but that's one example of state legislation.
Dr. Kincaid, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to follow up with you on the state perspective, and a two questions here. First one, I'll I'll make an observation, but would love to have your thoughts on it. So maybe more observation than question. You mentioned that a lot of states are either looking at or have passed a moratorium on local government, or not on local on data centers rather. Can you give us a reason why that doesn't necessarily mean that we should ignore data centers and the topic for, if there's a 3-year moratorium, for example, that doesn't mean we can just sit back and ignore the topic for 3 years. Can you maybe speak to why that would not be the case, and why just because there's a moratorium doesn't mean that the problem goes away?
Yeah, I doubt any state in the long run is going to actually ban data centers. So the moratorium gives both the state and local governments time to plan ahead for, how they want to proceed with the development of data centers. Um, and we have yet to see how many more states are going to enact, 14 are considering it at the moment. Not all of them will enact a moratorium. So, yeah, the issue doesn't go away. What's the reason for the moratorium? Public opposition to data centers. I mean, that has emerged across the country.
Yeah.
And so that is why the states are really, state legislators feel they need to get into this issue because of public opposition. And it's just growing across the states, and states feel the need to respond to it. And so now it also depends on whether you're in a blue state or a red state. Um, Democratic states are much more active in legislating on AI and regulating AI than are Republican states. So
Mhm.
there's a very marked a recent study, statistically significant difference between red and blue states on these regulatory issues. So
Hmm.
a lot depends on whether you're in a red state or a blue state right now.
So on that, and you mentioned something too, Dr. Kincaid, about the need to pay attention to what your state legislatures are doing. So a two-part question to that. I worked in state government a while back, and for the most part, the people I worked with appeared to be as human as those in local government. And one of the things about humanity is we like to collaborate and work with each other, and also like to be the second to do something rather than first for the most part. So two-part question. Number one, are there specific states when it comes to the topics of AI and data centers? Are there specific states that are more bellwether for their legislation than others that maybe, while, if I'm in Wyoming, maybe don't expect to see a data center moratorium or a data center legislation, but maybe you should be paying attention to what Utah's doing, for example. And then second part to that question is, what should you be specifically looking for when it comes to the legislation at the state in your own state legislature?
I think it's too early to say that there's a bellwether state because this issue is so much in flux and there's hundreds of bills being considered at the moment by the states. So it's really hard, in my opinion, it's hard to talk about a bellwether state on this issue. The main thing local governments should be looking for is to what extent will the state preempt local authority, zoning laws, things like that, with regard to data centers. And I think that's the main thing that municipal governments would want to be concerned about. And so the New Jersey plan doesn't do that, and it actually ends up providing a fair amount of support to local governments in dealing with data centers, like those community benefits agreements. So that's something that local governments can think about in terms of, what kind of assistance legislation from the state can actually provide assistance to local governments in addressing these issues.
Yeah. Let's zoom out a layer above and talk about our collectively favorite institution, the United States Congress, and discuss the Great American AI Act, which, from my understanding, is still being deliberated and it's not necessarily passed, and who knows if it will pass. But I would imagine that in the next decade, something could be passed by Congress when it comes to the topic of AI and things like that. So Nicole, starting off with you, what if Congress were to pass something like or similar to the Great American AI Act or something of that nature with a sweeping federal bill like that, what should local governments be paying attention to, and what should they be doing regardless of what Washington does, both in the interim as conversations are had, and then if you can put on your foresight hat a little bit too, steal some juju from Hassan, and kind of look at the future about maybe what local government should preparing for that as well too.
So with any kind of, if it come down in the way of legislation or a mandate, and what we're required to do, that in itself has its own thresholds for the need for education and understanding, and really knowing what to expect, along with having the capacity internally to know what to be able to do. And I think this question is probably going to be better responded to from Professor Kincaid, just with his background. I think that, he'll be better to respond to that specifically, whereas I can give you the boots on the ground as we get there and what
Yeah.
that's like as far as, the implementation thereof.
Yeah. So I'd love to go kick it off to or kick it over to Dr. Kincaid, and then Nicole jump in with any boots on the ground perspective too, please. But Dr. Kincaid, what are how does something like that change the landscape? What should local governments be looking at and paying attention to when it comes to a federal piece of legislation like the Great American AI Act?
Well, I doubt it's going to be passed, but the key issue is preemption. So, given the current presidential administration believes that artificial intelligence should be very lightly regulated by the federal government and by the states. So the proposal calls for extensive preemption of state laws. The president's already issued an executive order and is trying to withhold funds from states that don't, put a moratorium on their AI regulations. So the current administration is very preemptive, and that would include extending preemption even to local zoning rules in order to have data centers built. So I
Mm.
think that those are the kinds of issues that local governments should be concerned about. How deep is this preemption going to go if it were enacted? So again, it consists with like red states regulate less than blue states. The same way, the Republicans in Congress and the White House, very light regulation. The president thinks that AI is a national security issue, so the United States should beat China in the AI race and be using AI as part of the national defense system. And so that's why the president doesn't want any regulation of AI. If the Democrats gain control of Congress after the November election, they will be pushing, I think, their own AI regulation, which will be quite different from the Republican approach and much more expansive federal regulation, but probably not touching local governments that much.
Yeah.
But that legislation probably won't pass unless Democrats hold Congress and then also win the presidential election. So lots up in the air
Yeah.
in that respect.
Yeah, I think I think it's probably why you're seeing legislation, not legislation, but you're seeing those executive orders rather than a bill through the halls of Congress. Um, More in the boots on the ground perspective, you know, as I've talked with local governments and as I've talked with folks across the country on these two pressing topics, both AI and data centers, the one thing I keep getting feedback from and nearly universal consensus on is a desire to see working groups, best practice sharing, and those kind of things among local governments around data centers, around AI. Can you, maybe Nicole, start with you, what examples are there of that kind of bottom-up coordination? Can you give some examples of that? And then Dr. Kincaid, I have a follow-up for you on how does that, what does it tell us about how local governments can lead without waiting for state or federal direction? But Nicole, I'd love to hear maybe some practical examples on that bottom-up coordination on these two pressing topics.
Sure. I mean, we try to, in local government, try to press the stance of not being reactive, right? We want to be proactive. And how do you do that is you have to get ahead of things. You need guidance, you need coordination. And having that coordination vacuum is really it's an issue that we're trying to avoid. So being able to know where your resources are, such as given in the beginning of this conversation, what is happening at the municipal level, what is happening at the county level. Is there a consortium of communities that are grouping together to be able to get ahead of these things? And in local government, we don't need to recreate the wheel, right? We just need to know what the wheel is, and we need to be
Yeah.
able to roll with that. So, those efforts that you see, where you see the, county level planning commissions or the consortium of communities getting together and putting out those guides, with DCED putting out the planning toolkits. They're the things that I think are really a great reference, to be going to know where to turn, and then relying on your resources such as your solicitors and the engineers that are involved in this world, and really just looking for where can you be best educated, and for the managers to be able to get out to the elected officials and make sure that they understand what is coming in front of them. I
Yeah.
think it's really important. Um, it's all about exactly transparency, trust, and being able to make sure that the public awareness is there, and making sure that communication is also occurring. So all those basic principles apply to this very much so.
Yeah. On the idea of best practice sharing, specifically to data centers, do you know of any specific examples of communities, of counties, entities in Pennsylvania that you would say are doing that doing that well right now?
Um, we both spoke to both Chester County, and then also Montgomery County. I'm in Pennsylvania are putting out those ordinance guides and the best practices. So they would be the two that I know of. And Professor Kincaid, you referenced them also.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to
Yeah, I
highlight that,
think
please.
yeah, I think we come back to your first point, which is the tremendous diversity of cities.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So we're not just talking about data centers, we're talking about the use of AI more generally. And big cities can hire their own tech experts, so they can deal with it that way. I think cities with city managers are going to do better because the city managers communicate with each other. And that's what we see here. They're talking to each other. And our own forum we had that you spoke to was an example of that,
Yeah.
sharing among the city. But the cities that are going to have the most difficulty will be those that don't have a city manager, that are very small, that have part-time elected officials, and
Mhm.
they don't have the same access to expertise, and they're not plugged into the networks. And so that's where county governments can play a bigger role as they
Mm.
develop model ordinances. They can at least help local governments with regard to data centers. Um,
Yeah.
Now, the other thing for local governments to think about is what kinds of legislation are the states enacting for local governments? And what we're seeing so far is a number of things that the states are requiring local governments to do with respect to AI. One is many states are requiring local agencies to disclose their use of AI to the public. So
Mm.
that's a legal requirement. They're issuing ethical guidelines for employee use of AI, another thing. Several states now have prohibited AI productivity scoring of state and local workers, and
Interesting.
that's become an issue. Pretty much all the state legislation requires human review for any automated or algorithmic recommendations. So for health and welfare benefits and so on, if AI is used to determine who gets these benefits, that has to be human review of that. That's another state law requirement. States' laws are requiring local governments to provide for data security, rules about data retention. Uh, um, State laws are also banning deep fakes. Um, There are also a number of states have said that any local public-facing chat bots, okay, must explicitly identify themselves as AI
Mm.
and provide clear paths for citizens to get to a human staff person and not be locked into a machine
Yeah.
necessarily. A couple of states have passed laws prohibiting AI integration with weapon systems. Uh, and so we have a lot of state legislation that's coming up on with respect to that are going to affect local governments, and that was just kind of a short list. So we're seeing more of that.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating, Dr. Kincaid, too, because on the one hand, you're seeing this use the term grassroots movement. You're seeing what Chester County and Montgomery County is doing. And I love those examples because they're more than just, hey, take this ordinance and adopt it in your place. It's more the template and the conversation for how each unique entity should be exploring and looking at that, which I think is extremely helpful because it appears to at least account for the variety in local government. And at the same time, too, you're seeing these different ways in which state legislatures are creating the rules of the road, so to speak, for how local governments deploy and use AI and deliver services via AI in their communities, which I think is something to continue to pay attention to. Because your point at the beginning of the webinar about paying attention to what your state legislature is doing um, applies here very well there. Curious as to this too, as we kind of wrap things up, and if there's any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat if anyone has any questions for Dr. Kincaid or Nicole as well. But Nicole, I'll start with you. You've, especially given your experience in local government, really want to lean on that. What would be your advice as if I'm a city manager or a county administrator, and I'm asking you, what's one thing I should focus on as we approach this topic of AI from a policy standpoint, from a practice standpoint, from a deployment standpoint? What is one thing that we should keep in mind and focus on that we could learn from your years of experience in local government and your work at the Meyner Center?
So the use of AI can make you more effective and efficient. You're able to do tasks and do them more effectively, more efficiently, quicker. And there's the ability in a way to really take the overall um, framework and systems that we have in local government, those requirements, and streamline those processes. So that's a benefit to communities, is communities who do not have capacity, they don't have resources, you're able to take that use of AI and get the things done in a way that your capacity allows. But you need to know how to do those things, right? You need to know what it is that is required to do those things. And you cannot take the human component out of public service. It's not an option. So, residents come into municipal buildings to pay their utility bills, to talk to someone. That's an important part of our day to day. And I think it's something to really recognize, is as much as technology is out there and it's important to streamline, to make more effective and efficient, you cannot remove that human component. It has to be there for public service, and it's a very important part of retaining trust,
Mm.
building trust, and really it's the experience. You can't take that away from the public.
That's an excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up too, about the need for building and retaining trust. I think that's the currency of our local government, and I'm so glad we we came to that. Even it took us 40 minutes to get there, but I think that's so important to bring home, because you're 100% right. We are at our best when we have the highest levels of trust, both internally and then with our external, outside of your city government ecosystem itself too. So thank you so much for bringing that up too. I think that's very well said, and needs to be reminded. We need to be reminded of that all the time.
I think it's
Doc,
also, if I just may add, I think it's also
please.
important for the internal staff too. The ability to utilize these resources and tools is really important also, because it's taking a weight off the shoulders, right? It's relieving the stresses that exist from those mundane tasks that you need to do.
Mhm.
So you're able to get that time back, maybe that you wouldn't have. So I think that's the other side of it, is you have the public component, and then you also have the staffing side of things, that
Yeah.
it can be very beneficial in the correct atmosphere and use.
Yeah, and taking those things off, that way they have more opportunities to build trust with their with their fellow neighbors as well too. So yeah, thanks for adding that point. Dr. Kincaid, I feel a type of debt and obligation to ask you a question on intergovernmental affairs, given your work and your extensive background in the subject. So I'll close with this question for you, sir. You know, if you could tell every city manager, every county administrator one thing about how intergovernmental systems actually work that would change the way that they approach AI and data centers and influence, what would that one thing be?
When you say they approach, you mean
So in
how
the
the
ways that
how the state should react, or?
how the city managers and how county managers approach AI policy, data center policy, and influence, how they're interacting and watching their state legislatures and things like that, but specific to how city managers and county administrators approach this topic.
Well, I think the one main thing to look for is the extent to which any state legislation is going to reduce local discretion in the area of AI. And so they should be working through their state municipal league or township league, whatever the case might be, in, kind of steering the legislature in directions that would maximize the discretion that's available for local governments in adopting AI and responding to AI issues.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, and you're seeing seemingly across state legislatures, you're seeing it on a variety of different fronts. More and more pushback against local control and things like that, whether it be development, whether it be AI, whether it be housing, and all kinds of things like that. You're seeing more and more pushback against that. So definitely something to keep a close eye on and to watch. Appreciate that insight there as well too. So very well put, and something that we should all pay attention to, even after legislation, the legislative session ends. Something to continue to advocate for and to understand with our different state municipal leagues and chapters like that. So with that being said, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude for Dr. Kincaid and Nicole Beckett for their time and sharing their expertise with us. I don't see any unanswered questions in the chat here. Let me just double check here. But yeah, no unanswered questions here. Hassan or Mike, any questions from you two gentlemen at all?
Oh man, a lot of questions, but we don't have time to jump into all of them. I just want to say thank you so much to Nicole and to you, Dr. Kincaid and Micah, for leading this conversation. Everywhere I go in working with cities, this is a hot topic. And there's the tension that we see all over the country between the state control, as you were saying, Dr. Kincaid and Micah, you were alluding to that too, and local control. These are divisive times, and yet local governments have got to find the right path. And really, I loved what you said, Nicole, about the right use of AI really is what builds trust. Not to wholesale use it without knowing what you're doing, and not to reject it, but both internally and externally, the right use of it, I think, is a tool that allows us to grow transparency and grow trust. But boy, it's not an easy task. It's not a clear journey. And your information today has been very helpful for people to think on. And thank you for the work you are both doing in the Meyner Center. And I have not been there, but maybe I'll get the chance next time I'm up in the Northeast area to come by and meet you personally and get a little tour. I would love that. So thank you again so much for both of your contributions today, and Micah. And I want to just invite all of you. There were some great resources that Nicole mentioned, Halson also mentioned. So make sure before we sign off that if you haven't done that already, you copy those, cut and paste them so that you can use them. I think that you will enjoy them. And we want to invite you to come back next week. We have our friend Randy Mayu, who's going to be presenting the book, Flourishing, from Daniel Coyle, is one of my favorite authors. And we're really going from one end of the spectrum to the other. Here we've been talking about AI all day, and this one next week will be about managers and leaders and how they create environments that help teams and employees thrive. And I think you'll benefit from that one as well. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Lisa Shook, for your work behind the scenes as always. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and we will see you down the road.